Hi, and welcome to another episode of NAPO's podcast Standout. I'm your host, productivity catalyst Clare Kumar, and as always, so happy to be with you. I'm really excited this week to have a continuation on in our discussion of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you go back through our history, we've had some conversations earlier, which I really encourage you to tune into as well. There's rich conversation from our members and also from experts outside who are bringing insight into this conversation. Today, we're going to have a conversation. If you're watching the video, you'll see I have two NAPO members with me. I'm going to give a bit of a setup to what we're going to talk about today and introduce them just shortly. So hang tight for that. What I thought we would do today, which is a little bit different, is really dive into understanding the lived experience of two of our members, and I'll throw probably some comments in as well, of people who have felt excluded in their personal and professional lives, and to invite the sharing of stories so you as the listener can really understand, gee, what might it have been like to experience that? What would I do in that situation if I ever encountered a situation like that? And so the objective here is to, as far as building our understanding of what we can do to further our growth as humans and in this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's an awareness piece, and that's definitely what we're playing into here. There's also an alignment with the understanding of someone else's experience. And then there's a step into allyship and action. And that's what this is further encouraging for you, is to understand, what's the conversation? What are the lived experiences? What can I look out for? And if I encounter something in my world, what can I do to be that ally, to be that supportive person? So that's the invitation to all you listeners out there who are on your own journey. And we're just excited as NAPO to be part of that and furthering this conversation. So you're wondering probably, who do I have with me? And I want to highlight two members. First of all, just because he's at the top of my screen today, this is Todd Allan. Todd has been an organizer and a member of NAPO for 7 years now. He realized a good thing right away when he decided to become a professional and join the organization, because that would also further the growth of his professional business. He is the owner of Structured Space LLC. And he started primarily, as many of us do, working on residential projects, but he recognized his great love for technology and staying on top of digital clutter. So now you can find Todd as a Google Cloud certified, he's Google Cloud certified in Google Workspace, as well as an Evernote certified consultant. I probably need to have a side conversation with you, Todd. He now works with individuals and small business on organizing digital information, helping clients roll out Google Workspace, because there's a lot in there, and create information workflows with Evernote. So I'm very excited to have you with us, Todd. Janine Sarna-Jones is my other guest. And Janine has been a member. Hey girl, it's 20 years since 2001. I like that's we need to celebrate that. She's the founder of Organize Me Inc., based in New York City. She's a certified professional organizer. So when you see that CPO, registered trademark, at the end of an organizer or at the end of somebody's name, that's that very credible designation. And she's also a certified move manager. She's served as the president of the New York chapter and also a term on NAPO's board of directors. She's a member of the National Association of Specialty and Senior Move Managers, NASMM, and the National Association of Black Professional Organizers, NAPO, which you will have heard about if you listened to one of our earlier DEI podcasts. So I want to welcome both of you and thank you so much for joining me to share your experience with our NAPO podcast listeners. Welcome today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Claire.
So, Janine, I'd love to start with you. What is top of mind for you about this conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion right now?
Top of mind is I it's something that I've lived my entire life with. It's not something that, it kind of goes through waves of like total anger and other times feeling pretty relaxed about it. I have experienced it my entire life. I mean, there's not been a moment when I haven't lived it, from the time that I was very young, when I lived in a neighborhood that was either Mexican, Black, or white. And I wasn't easily identifiable as either one of those things to the people that lived in the community, and especially children. And so for me, basically, I would say that it's what's top of mind is my hope that eventually things will change. But, you think about the fact that how long ago was it that George Floyd was murdered? And some things have happened because of that, but there's still people being killed. Nothing has really radically changed, in the country. The conversation has changed a bit, which, but my hope is that people keep it in mind, that it's because it's not just about color. Diversity, equity, inclusion is about all kinds of people. It's like right now a lot of transgendered people are getting a lot of airtime, but still a lot of transgendered people are dying as well. It's definitely a conversation about how can we include human beings into the conversation, whatever the conversation is. How can we allow them to be who they are and be able and present to express that to whomever they want to without fear of being harmed?
Yeah, you say that beautifully because we're on the journey. It's a lifetime that we've been living. It does feel to me like more people are part of the conversation, which is, as you say, hopeful. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Todd, I want to ask you the same question. And so in your what does this conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion mean to you? Where are you in your thoughts around it right now? And help us explain your relationship to feeling excluded perhaps at some time.
Well, I think the important thing is for people to realize that it's not a homogenous society. There are others that that are out there, and for me, it's a little bit different because as a gay man and my as a minority being a gay man, it's I mean I could act like a straight person really easily, but so it's a little bit different because my I won't say my minority, but what makes me a minority is that it's inside me. It's not in front of me. So I think for me, it's just having people realize that, like I said, it's not a homogenous society, and changing the hearts that are changeable, and maybe understanding that some hearts are not changeable, and knowing the difference perhaps. So I think that's the basic point, is that for society to realize that there are others out there.
Yeah, that's what you said, something very powerful there, recognizing some hearts are not changeable. And it struck me in that moment that I say right now, at this moment, maybe not, but it reminded me of a conversation I listened to once on the radio. And this was, I think, years of conversation between a Black man and a white man. And over years of persistence in conversation, there was a change of mind, but it took years. And so it just gave me the sense that, yeah, do we, knowing when and where and what the context is, and, how do we push for change, and can we push for change, and what does that look like? Because sometimes there's a lot of patience required. I want to just add one element to the conversation personally here, because as you probably know, I'm in Toronto, and yesterday, September 30th, was Canada's first National Day commemorating Truth and Reconciliation. So it's a national day of recognition for the way Indigenous people have been treated in our country, which we weren't taught about in school. So it's quite powerful, Janine, because your comment that you've lived this your entire life is really coming to bear, because what was wonderful about yesterday was the media was sharing a lot of stories. And I heard exactly the same thing. It's like, well, this is just another day for us in the journey of feeling excluded and abused, and many interesting and challenging situations came through there. But what I think is powerful is what's being asked of us as a country with respect to this particular situation, and more broadly, is that we make efforts to understand, to listen, to share stories, and to really demonstrate support and allyship for the communities that are diverse and excluded. And another community I'd like to bring up into the conversation, which is sometimes there and sometimes not, and it's an interesting one for me, because I'm noticing I'm feeling a sense of exclusivity within the community. So I just wanted to pop this into the conversation. So people know I talked about being highly sensitive, and high sensitivity is a trait, not a disorder. And for that reason, I think it's often being excluded from the people that are labeled as neurodivergent. So I've participated in conferences on neurodivergence, and I'm like, well, but why are you saying it's only 1 in 7 when it's 1 in 5? And so there's an interesting opportunity sometimes. And as we've seen LGBTQ expand, there's a wait, I need to be a part of this conversation too. So sometimes there's issue with exclusivity, even in, or the movement to be understood, which is a fascinating conversation to have. So what I like about this whole topic, though, is that you're right, Janine, you were saying it's about other and making sure that's inclusive. And one of the things that I think about too, having lived in Japan, where other was me, and other was non-Japanese physically appearing person, context really matters, right? So where are you and what does that look like? And so Janine, you talked about growing up in Palo Alto and this sense of, I think it's a sense of not belonging. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience there and any connection to what you feel now today, based on
Well,
that upbringing?
to be specific, it was East Palo Alto, which is not Palo Alto.
Yeah.
It's I think that the experience of it, I remember, okay, so I have a story for you. When I was in the 3rd grade, I think it was the 3rd grade, it might have been the beginning of the 4th, because I left in the 4th grade and with my mom, and we came to New York while my dad was selling the house and whatnot. But there was a kid that was new to the school, and I still remember his name. He was so evil to me. I mean, he made it his mission to like just belittle me daily. And I realized later that he was from Nicaragua and he was not Mexican. And so he took a lot of his energy and focused it on me so that he could distract any any notice of his otherness as a Nicaraguan.
Wow.
And it was like many years later when I, had
Put it together.
Yeah, it was like, oh, yeah. So, I mean, I still, I'm not holding a grudge because I'm old. Children are evil sometimes. But
I think what you're tapping into, if I can observe, I think you've stepped into compassion for his situation.
I wouldn't say
am I overstepping there? No, okay, interesting.
No, I think it's just that I realized that I don't necessarily, I have more of an understanding of his situation. And and I also believe that, as I've always understood subtext, even as a child, I always knew that there was something else going on. When people talk, there's always other stuff underneath. And I like to read subtitles like that. That was, and it was like that realization was like, oh my goodness, this was really all about him trying to deflect because those Mexican kids would have been after him. They would have had whatever they had to say to him about being Nicaraguan, because it was definitely an issue. So he focused all of his attention and energy on somebody who was so clearly other, because
More other than he appeared to be. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Because, he spoke Spanish, and it was a bilingual school. And, but it was torture. But I can tell you that there have been times throughout my life. I mean, and I think because, I'm light skinned, my sister is dark skinned, I know that my different experience has a lot to do with my skin color. But in California growing up, I was like a little brown nut. And as I've gotten older and I am indoors more, like I am this color, right?
Yeah, I'm seasonally brown, and in winter I'm like an olive. I don't know. I say I go kind of moldy because my skin is like olivey green. I'm like, what is this color? Yeah, but a marked difference between sun and not enough sun. Yeah, I get you.
So for a vast majority of my life, not from when I was a little kid living in California, but the vast majority of my life, people just assume that I am what they are. And, when I went to Italy, everybody thought I was Italian.
I get that.
If I'm in New York, somebody who's Puerto Rican or Spanish speaking, they'll come up to me and ask me questions, because they assume I'm Puerto Rican. But, I could be anything. And I definitely do believe that, all of those moments in time where I felt like the other, they've informed where I am now, which is like, I just assume that somebody has to tell me what they are, who they are, if they want to, because there were so many times when I was asked, so what are you anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you from?
Yeah, I want to bring this in to ask Todd as well. But I think what we're talking about now is there's an opportunity when you're mixed, as I am, to potentially perceived to belong to many different places. But there's places where you don't feel like you belong enough as well. And Todd, I wanted to talk to you about that, because there's this concept of masking. We can blend in if we choose to. And if you're neurodivergent, and there's ways to mask your challenges with neurodiversity. You can hide the fact that you're gay. Like, no one has to know. I can be Italian too. I mean, I had Italians argue with me that you are Italian. You are Italian. How does this to mask or not to mask question, has that ever showed up in your life? Do I, I mean, there's coming out and then there's speaking out, and maybe there's something to talk about in that. Todd, do you have a comment or something to share around that?
Well, kind of to dovetail on Janine's story, I grew up in a small town in Eastern Washington, and in that environment, I really had to hide who I was. And now in the gay community, people refer to me as masculine. But back in the day when I was growing up and going to school, I would hide any kind of potential flourish that I might have behind some face of masculinity, because the teasing that I had was just ruthless. So I guess that masking thing fits in perfectly with what you said, Claire, that I guess masking has been a way of life for me for a great majority of my life. Just that whole, I can't appear that way. Mm-hmm. I have to appear as an other. Not an other, but appear like you, as non-other, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to also dovetail on some of the comments Janine made, my partner of 6 years is Filipino. And we go out and people will walk up to him and say, "Where are you from?" And he says, "Everett, Everett, Washington."
Yeah.
And they're like, "No, where are you from?" And it's just like, I think that's just such a non-thing to say to somebody.
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one, because I've had this question my whole life too, and I usually come back with, now, as a kid, I didn't want to be other. I really did not want to be Indian. Half my heritage is 5/8 Indian, 3/8 white, so 1/4 British, 1/8 Welsh. There's the recipe, okay? And so I did not want to be Indian, because my perception of Indian then was, because of the great ingredients that's used in cooking, is and it was carried in the clothing and so on. It was like, doesn't smell good to be Indian. So people didn't like, and it was the asafoetida, I think it was our hing is the ingredient. And I didn't want to be other. I didn't want to be different. So I was not proud of my heritage for a long time. I've graduated now. I like my nose, my feet, and my heritage. I'm okay with all of that. And I will use it as a conversation starter. So someone will say, "Oh, where are you from? What's your background?" I'm like, "You want to guess?" And I don't take aversion to that question, but I tell you, when I did, I was, well, I do want to come back to that. But one time when I did take a bit of offense, I was in a park with my son, who was still an infant. He was maybe 7 months old or something, and he was in one of the swings. And somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, when did he get here?" And I'm like, "Well, we got here 5 minutes ago." And my kids are of Asian heritage. Their father is 3rd generation Japanese Canadian, full Japanese parents. So I've further mixed. Now my kids can't even explain the recipe, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's too long. And I didn't even get the question at first, but they assumed I imported my son, and I'm like, I have scars. Like I need some credit here for some work that went into this. And the second time it happened, I was babbling to my daughter, who was about 3 or 4 months old, in a change room after working out at the Y, and I was like just nonsensical talking to her. And someone came up to me and said, "Oh, are you speaking Chinese?" I'm like, no, more scars. I've got more scars. It's like, so that kind of stung when the assumption was that the infant that you just had wasn't even yours. But I want to dig into that a little bit, because I don't, because maybe sometimes I've asked the question, I've been curious where somebody's from, and I'm really interested in what's the background and so on. I'm thinking, how do we have those questions? How do we ask those questions in a non-disrespectful way? Is there a way to do it? I came up with an idea recently I'll share, but I'm curious, maybe Todd, because you're nodding, I'm going to ask you first, because we'll continue on the masking, and then I'll come down to you, Janine. Is there a way to have these conversations or be curious in a way that is non-offensive?
Well, I think in the example of my partner, I think his race or nationality should not be the first thing that you're curious about. It's like,
what should it be? What did you have for breakfast? Well, like
what is your name?
Okay.
How are you? What do you do? How long have you been in Seattle? That kind of thing. It's like, why would race or nationality be the first thing you would want to know about somebody? It's like,
interesting. Yeah.
That's a pretty coarse view of things, I really believe. But I have to excuse human behavior too, because we have to categorize to understand.
Right.
But having said that, I will go back to being interested in the person and not the nationality or heritage.
That's okay. That's interesting. I think, does it have something to do with that? I mean, that's the first thing that somebody, because we're in large part visual, for anybody who's sighted, we're visually perceivers and processors. And so that's the first thing we think of commenting. I mean, I would say I probably comment on people's fashion more on. It's like, where'd you get that coat? Because it's something I see and it's like, I love the pattern or something. But yeah, you raise a good point. So I'll cue from there and then come back down to you, Janine. I have asked somebody their name, and then I often comment, oh, if I haven't heard, it's like, oh, that's a beautiful name. What's the origin of the name? Because I do love language, and I found that's not where are you from, but where's your name from? And which may or may not be where the person's from. I have a German Italian friend who has a Greek name. So, there's more variant disconnection anyway. But what do you think of that?
Well, I think what you said is the first thing you asked was the name.
Mm-hmm.
And then you gently entered into a conversation about race or nationality, but just to blurt out, where are you from? Meaning,
well, because a lot of times is it loaded. It's coming from a place of, oh, you're not from here. And I'm noticing that. And that's what I'm going to lead into so context again, this is my introduction. Your introduction to me and mine to you is, you're not from here. That's sort of the play on that card on the table. Janine, what do you think about this conversation and how to stay curious, but not offensive?
Curious and not I think I think you have to realize that sometimes people don't want to tell you where they're from, that's not, mm-hmm. I don't think that should be even in the top 10 questions in a conversation, because especially if you, okay, so there was this book, remember The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski? Do you remember that?
No.
It was like old. It's an old book. It was from the 70s. And I remember reading that book in the 80s, I think. And it was one of the stories in the book is this idea that, you take a bird from its flock and then you paint it a different color and it goes back to the flock and the flock attacks it.
This is a sad story? Yeah, this is a sad story.
It's an interesting thing because I think that, Todd was talking about how in his growing up, he had to wear this mask. And I think and he's rightly so, I have never been able to wear a mask. And honestly, after a certain amount of time, people, having people ask me all the time, so what is your mask? What are you masking? Or who is that? Yeah. I feel like, I've gone through periods of time when I would say, I would tell people I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, and I own them all, whereas in this country, if you were one drop Black, octoroons and stuff like that, then you were Black, right? Mm-hmm. But I am Black. I am English, or Irish, mm-hmm. Scotch-Irish, and I am Ramapo and Mohawk. So there's a few things that are mixed in, but I also own it. It's this is who I am, but I don't necessarily need to share it with you exactly who I am, how I identify. I do identify as a person of color, and I make that clear to people and I know I'm kind of diverging a little bit from your question, but I have something I want to tell you. When I was growing up, I have cousins who I kind of helped to raise. I was the main babysitter for them, and I love them. They're like little brothers and little sister. And I remember my mother was disowned by her father because she hooked up with my dad and had me. And I remember babysitting them one day, and I saw a picture of my little cousin that was in a frame, and it was from behind, and I could recognize the older cousin. He was walking, with this little hand holding the hand of an older man. And I was like, oh, who's that in the picture? And I found out that it was somebody who was my grandfather, who I'd never met, because I was not white enough,
Wow.
and,
Yeah.
Whereas my cousins are Jewish and white. And I was like, oh, okay. That was like in my teens. And that really, like, I had to really churn through and think about that. And I realized that a big piece of that was because I was not the right color.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been several times over the years, it's not always people who are non-colored who are the people that cause problems or give me things to think about. Like in college, I went to this talk about multiculturalism and mixed race and things like that. And a Black woman who was a student in the Ujima, the Black House on campus, she raised her hand and she started talking about how she felt so sorry for people who were mixed because it was so confusing for them, though she is not mixed. And she wanted to speak for me. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever felt that a Black person could be racist. Like I had never, in my family, that's Black, I always felt included and a part of the family. And like, that side of my father's side of the family always was, they were my people. And it was, so there are times when you have to decide how you're going to present yourself. And of course I raised my hand right away after she said what she had to say so that I could like school her. And I do think that I do think that people need to think about, like, because would you ask a gay guy, like, so like something super offensive, like, oh, who's the top? Or like, who's the wife? I've heard that. And I think that's insane. These happen to be two men,
Can I ask you what you said to her to school her? Or how you would, what you would say in that situation to sort of bring somebody's understanding up so they want to continue to learn?
So I said, basically, I'm a mixed person and you have no idea what my experience has been. And you cannot tell me or put words into my mouth about how I am somehow, diminished by the fact that I'm mixed. That I embrace every single side of it. And that's who I am. And I am special and wonderful and amazing. And for you not to be able to know that, it's because you only see the fact that I'm not exactly what you are.
I hear you. I hear you so hard. Do you think that in her mind, she was trying to be supportive and it just got warped?
No. I mean, it's like, it wasn't about compassion or anything like that. It was about,
we've spoken before, and you tell me like you're not even wishful thinker and thinking where people are coming from. Like, no, it's not that. It's straight up not okay thinking. And it's interesting because I think this is some learning for me. I listened to the other podcast with the panel with Cindy, Mackenzie, and Tanisha, and I forget who was telling the story about a dog that barked. I think it might have been Tanisha.
Mackenzie.
Was it Mackenzie?
Mackenzie?
Okay. So Mackenzie was talking about the dog and the client who blamed the dog's yapping on the texture of Mackenzie's hair, that her hair, which is naturally curly and beautiful, could have been terrifying to the dog, and the dog was reacting to that. And my first reaction was, well, if the dog had been kicked by a person with the same hair, it's possible that could have been an associative trauma, but highly unlikely that this is what happened, right? But my first question, is that possible? Is it possible? I'm I don't know. I try not to jump to bias, but maybe I'm not seeing things as they are enough. And so anyway, that was just an observation as I listened to the story. I'm like, yeah, that's completely like, yeah, it's distasteful. But how do you stand up to these things on your own? And how do you, yeah, and how do you leave the person going, oh, I learned something and I'm uncomfortable, but I want to keep learning. I think that's my goal, but maybe, or Janine, you're going to look at me and go, nice try, girl.
No, I think it's, you have to, everybody's different, right? Like other people who are like me, mixed, they have had different experiences that are not like mine.
Yeah.
And there's so many different pieces of it because, Tanisha and I had conversations when we were preparing our NAPO conference workshop. And, she's not all Black, like she's also mixed. And I think that we live in a country that is still hasn't gone through the effort to repair the wrongs that what this country was built on and founded. And there's so many different ways. I mean, I don't want to focus on race because it's not all about race.
I'm going to take it from there, actually. And then, Todd, I want to bring you back into the conversation as well. When I look at the disability and inclusivity area, we talk a lot about not focusing on a disorder, not focusing on a label, but focusing on barriers and really coming at it with do you need anything? Is there anything in your way? And how can I be helpful? And I wonder if that's not a great mentality to have for inclusivity, no matter what the issue is. I mean, this is coming out of specifically disability situations where some of the challenges are invisible. And I know, for example, in post-secondary education right now, they're expecting students to put their hand up and say, I need this, and this. And I haven't found really good videos to watch as examples of having these conversations. And so I remember with Black Lives Matter and some friends of mine in Toronto who are Black, and some of the conversations being, don't ask a Black person to teach you what to do here because we're already burdened already. Thank you very much. But where is something that I can watch and learn from to get good language, to really be the person who's not putting my foot in my mouth if I do want to be an ally, and that I don't have a side effect of offending someone. I think maybe that's kind of the point of this whole conversation, is to say, how can you be an ally in such a way that's with such grace and love and affection and support that you can't be misunderstood?
Well, don't come at it from your own perspective. You have to, and I'll give you a story, which was interesting. When my partner and I got together, we were in downtown Seattle and we were going to cross the street. And I said, oh, let's just jaywalk. And he said, yeah, that's fine. You're white. Oh. I'm like, what? And then it finally dawned on me that friends of his had received tickets for jaywalking, which I never have. And then another time we were driving up to Stevens Pass to go skiing, and he was speeding and the state patrol pulled him over. And so he got everything out, rolled his window down, and he put his hands up on the steering wheel and waited for the patrolman to come talk to him. Yeah. When that happens to me, I roll the window down. I say, hey, what's up? What do you need? And those perspectives just came flooding in. And so I do want to back up and say one kind of funny thing. When I was talking about how people will walk up to him and say, where are you from? I said, did I ever say that to you? And he said, no, you didn't. I was like, oh, thank goodness. But I think to answer your question, it's like, I don't think there's a video you can watch. I don't think there's a podcast you can listen to. I think it's just being aware of that learning experience, like for me with the jaywalking or being pulled over, that assimilating that, because that was a rush of knowledge, I think, that I've never really experienced before, because it just jerked me out of my environment that I grew up in, which, by the way, the first time I ever saw a person of color when I was growing up was when I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow. And you remember it?
Yeah.
Wow. I appreciate those insights, because at the same time as being a gay man, you're also a white man who in many instances then has the privilege of being a white man in today's society. So there's this conundrum of being perceived like you have all the privilege. And in some cases you do have privilege, as we all do in different areas. And in some cases, clearly not. Thank you very much. So it's, I think it is multifaceted, and the context matters. And so, yeah, I think if we could say something to listeners out there of what we encourage them to do, then I want to throw it back to each of you. Todd, I'll start with you. Is if you could say something to a listener to encourage them on their journey of assimilation and learning, any other further thoughts you have on that?
That's really a tough question. And it's hard for me to get out of my own perspective.
That's okay. From well, this is it, right? You just said, don't come from your perspective, right? But this is where we all do come from. We're incubated in our own perspective, and we have to have some kind of commitment to being curious, because how else are we going to learn? And compassion, but it can so quickly be misconstrued or be offensive. Like the woman in the park who said, "Oh, when did he get here?" She was just wanting to talk and find some common connection about potentially a similar situation. She didn't know. She just threw a bomb on me here. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right? So.
But think of the genesis of that question, though. The genesis of that question was she assumed that she made just a wholly incorrect assumption.
Correct.
And that's what happens when people approach my partner. And going back to being a gay man, I mean, I can put the mask on and I can just be heteronormative, but that's not a choice that I make anymore. So, and I guess when I confront somebody that I feel like, is this person worth confronting, or is it just like give them the brush off and I don't care? And so then people that I confront, usually I feel like they have a choice, or they have a chance to learn and grow.
Yeah, but it's a clear investment of your time and energy to choose to be in that moment, to either take a stand. And there's a story I want to come back to you to invite you to share on that. When we have sometimes to speak up for ourselves. And right now I've been talking about how do other people speak up for us, but there's times when we have to speak up for ourselves. Before I come back to you, Todd, and ask you for that question, is there anything that you wanted to add, Janine, on in terms of your perspective of what you would really encourage someone is like yesterday, for example, for me with the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I was reading from Indigenous people on there's 94 calls to action, I think, of actions they want people to take. One of them was wearing orange. In the meeting I was in yesterday, I was the only one wearing orange, but I wasn't wearing one of the orange t-shirts by an Aboriginal artist, which I felt was even a better, embodiment. But it's like, there's many levels and depths of actions. What's your feeling on that? I'll stop talking now because that's a long question.
Okay, I might have to ask you to ask the question again. But
well, your sense of what you would be asking people to do to be an ally that you would be like, I like that. I appreciate that.
I think I don't know. I don't really feel like me personally, I would be asking someone to be an ally for me, because I am super vocal. I know how to say what I need to say in just about any situation. Okay. But, there's like simple things, like when you walk into a room and everyone looks like you, like, look around. Like, think about it. How many of the people that are in here are just like you? Like, that's the way I used to feel in NAPO. I would go to a NAPO conference. My first one was in 2002.
Mhm.
And I walked in, and everyone, just about every single person there was white, a
Mhm.
white woman,
Mhm.
not, I don't think I met one man.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until later but I would say, think about how many, and to be an ally, it's really when you see something, say something.
Yeah.
It's not really the,
But be careful.
um,
Like, think about what to say.
yeah, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's like, it could be anything. Like, I remember years and years ago, this Black guy was standing on this curb trying to hail a cab, and every cab kept passing him.
Yeah.
And so I stepped out into the street and I hailed a cab for him. And I was like, here you go.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's like a small thing to do. But when you notice things where somebody is, because it doesn't always have to be something negative, or I wouldn't want you to put yourself in harm's way,
Mhm.
though, to truly be an ally,
Mhm.
you could. You could,
Yeah.
if you wanted to be a co-conspirator on some level,
Mhm.
um, you could
There's some bravery
put,
involved. There's some brave. First of
yeah,
all, there's the awareness to notice, and then there's some bravery and some crafting, some word crafting to figure out, what do I say now? And I think it's worth thinking about maybe some of the what ifs, maybe some of the what ifs you might get into in your professional life now, and where you do, like you said, notice how diverse is this. I called out a speaker who was he's a top-notch speaker. I have so much respect for this gentleman, and he shared that he was in top billing with some other incredible world-class speakers, and there was one woman and no people of color whatsoever. And I said, at least there's a woman. Congratulations, and at least there's a woman. And he's like, I thought the same thing, and I went back to the organizers and I told them. He replied to me, but I thought, in this post, do I say something? And I thought, I think, knowing him, I could say something, because I don't want to detract from his celebration, but I wanted to say, why are we not seeing more diversity here? And so it is sort of, it's sort of knowing when the speaking up pieces, it takes a lot of bravery, I think. And it should take less. And the more we do it, the less it takes. So I'm like you, I speak up a lot, but not always. I think back to, and I'm coming back to you, Todd, in 1 minute before we sort of move towards a close. I'm thinking back to a time in my 20s when I was being verbally harassed by my boss. And it happened in a meeting. There were probably about 10 people in the meeting. And it was sexual harassment of a verbal nature in the meeting. And it happened to me, and I'll remember the individual sitting across from me, and he said, what is this, pick on Claire Day? I'll never forget that he actually spoke up. And I was at that moment ready to just get up and walk out of the office, because this had been happening for a few months. And I will never forget that he did that. He just called it out, and it stopped. And then I made the sexual harassment complaints to HR, and that was in a whole another story. And 13 other women had issues as well, but I was the first one to raise it with HR. There's some bravery in being an ally, and there's incredible bravery in speaking up. And I want to come back now to that bravery, Todd, in the story you told me before we started talking today, and wonder if you could share that as a bit of a close to this, to kind of highlight what individual exclusivity feels like, and that moment of bravery.
Well, the story was that before I became an organizer, I always wanted to sell cars. I'm a car nut, and I was always fascinated with the car sales process. So I was hired at the Acura dealership in Seattle. And in the car business, the Friday sales meeting is a big deal. It's this ceremony almost. And so I was sitting in my first Friday sales meeting, and one of the other top salesmen, who happened to be an ex-NFL football player who stood about 6'5" and maybe 275, he told a homophobic joke. And at that point, I had to decide if I was going to live in a shadow in my career there, or if I was going to speak out. And so after the meeting, I walked up to him and I said, I didn't really enjoy that joke because I'm a gay man, and I would appreciate it if that wouldn't happen anymore. And the cool thing was that he said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand that. I didn't know that at all. Promise you, I will never let it happen again. From that point on, my experience at the dealership was just top notch. Everybody was welcoming. There was no discrimination, no offhand comments at all. Everybody was really welcoming. So, and to dovetail that onto the organizing profession, you know, you can assume that somebody's heterosexual and then you can just enter into the spouse and whatever. I always have to enter into my relationship with kind of a cautionary approach, and I have to wait until there's some rapport. Maybe I understand where they're coming from before I divulge that I'm in a partnership and I'm a gay man. So having to navigate those challenging waters is, I think, just something that I'm always going to be presented with. But I'm just glad that in the time that I've been out, that I have made the choice to choose the path of truth. Because if you fail to make that choice, then you'll always live in the shadows, because if you don't make the choice then it's always harder to make the choice later.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. You would have had to continue to mask essentially and show up in a certain way. And then, yeah, how do you call it out later? Do you wish somebody at that table would have said something?
No, not necessarily. I felt it was my responsibility. And, you know, the car business is kind of a good old boy network. And so, you know, I guess I wouldn't have expected anybody in that environment to make that call out, but I did. And then it never happened again.
Yeah, well, I'm glad for that. That's it's amazing when people are in that situation, as I was in that meeting at work and that wholly inappropriate comment came up. I was so triggered with emotion that I didn't have the ability. Normally, Janine, like you, I'm pretty good at speaking up and standing out, and like, you don't, you know, the buck stops here. But at 23 years old, in that situation, I didn't have the skills. And so I think from the allyship perspective, it's that noticing piece that you were talking about, Janine. And Todd, I'm so happy for you that it came together in that moment and you had a good situation afterwards. I just want to close on thinking about the organizing profession now. And if there's anything you'd like to say to listeners about our particular profession, organizing and productivity, consulting, corporate world, residential world, we have our fingers in a lot of pies out there. So is there any message you'd like to leave as a takeaway for people as they consider their professional lives and being more inclusive? And Janine, I'll come back to you on that one.
Okay, so I think that people in the organizing profession, even if you're working, doing productivity, it doesn't really matter. But what I have found over these 20 years of being a NAPO member is that people tend to try to work with the people that are very as close to them as they possibly can. You know, they're very similar to them. And I think it's easy for them to create a rapport. So I used to work for someone else, and she used to send me out on all the jobs with the moms with little children, because I was a mom with a small child. And it was easy to build rapport with that group of moms that I worked with. But I think that in order to really truly be inclusive in your business, you need to be aware. Like, look at your website. If you have pictures of people, is everybody on there white? You know, like, is your team primarily white people? like, think about if you have a team, so many organizers are solopreneurs, but I think it all comes back to noticing, and seeing it from a different perspective. Like, I always, whenever I see marketing material for anybody in any situation, and it seems very homogenous, then I realize this person really doesn't see what I see. I mean, you can see it when a whole bunch of men put something together and there's not one woman, or there's the token woman, or there's the token person of color. You know what I mean? It's like, there's
Well, the way
always
something's
stuff like that.
designed, it's like a man did not design this. This bathroom in a hotel is not for me.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
And I can walk into somebody's home and see a closet and say, oh, this was designed for a man, definitely not for a woman.
Yeah.
That there's so many different ways that that you can just notice.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say. And it makes it possible for you, or educate yourself too. Like, here in New York, there's a huge population of Jewish people who eat kosher. And so setting up a kosher kitchen it's a very specific way of doing that. And it's, to educate yourself about that, it's a good thing, because then you can say, we can help you set up your kosher kitchen.
But it's to be aware of these things. So and maybe it's taking advantage of the things that come up in your life that can expand your understanding of different groups. So I got invited to the bar mitzvah celebration for a friend, and she said, oh, you were like my son's going to be on at this time and this time, and this is the minutes you need to listen to. I listened to the whole thing, because I thought, well, number one, the music it's beautiful, and I wanted to appreciate more and to understand it more. So I watched the whole thing, and then we had the tragedy of a Muslim family being attacked or being killed by a car in London, and they nationally televised the service. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to watch the service, because this is an opportunity to understand a culture I wouldn't normally be invited to or understand, but there's an opportunity to understand. So maybe it's tuning into those opportunities too, to just naturally in your life stay curious and stay noticing, so that you can continue to open your spirit. Todd, I want to just give you that question before we close out this call. Is there something that you would like to see in your or recommend listeners do in their personal and professional lives, rather, pardon me, when they're in the organizing and productivity businesses now, to be more inclusive?
Well, I think my comments are kind of directed at NAPO, really. And when I went to my first conference in LA, it was a very homogeneous environment. And I'm really excited about the DEI initiatives of NAPO. And I guess I'm just reaching out to NAPO and just say, let's keep it going, and let's welcome people with open arms, as like we used to say, the organizing authority. So I just say, let's just keep moving in that direction. And that's, I think those are my comments.
Thank you. It just reminded me of when I was listening to the other podcast with Cindy, Tanisha, and Mackenzie. And Sarah was a phenomenal host of this show for 2 years before I came on board. But I laughed at this, because at one point she said, open your arms wider. And I thought she said, open your arms wider. And I just thought, no, that's not what we need. And I was walking in the park and I burst out laughing. I'm like, no, wider. That's what we need. So hashtag open your arms wider. That's a great note to close. I want to thank both of you, Todd Allan and Janine Sarna-Jones, two longtime NAPO members, for joining me and sharing your perspectives and your wise counsel of what we can do individually and as part of this organization to stay inclusive in our approach to our businesses and the way we actually engage in our lives. So thank you so much for joining me. For all you listeners out there, definitely check out the diversity, equity, and inclusion episodes at NAPO. Also tune in to your chapters and the conference, because the content, it's not just a one-year initiative. This is NAPO's way of being going forward, is to continually have this be a conversation and a way of thinking. So definitely speak up and speak out as you are a member of the organization, or if you're listening and you're not, where it shows up in your life, definitely this is an invitation for you too. So tune in to more at napopodcast.com. You can find all the episodes there. It's pretty quiet in podcast land when we're putting something out. So we'd love to hear from you. If you have a comment, toss one out on social media. We're in all the places. And we'd love to hear what's resonating with you, what you'd like to hear more of. And if you have a story you'd like to share about your own diversity, equity, and inclusion experience, by all means, this is a great place to bounce off from and share your experience. So until next time, please stay safe, be kind, and enjoy your journey.